Hello, I'm Rishabh. I'll be presenting the session on humans here. So you must have seen this visualization quite a lot already in this talk. Humans are important, needless to stress. If the YouTube survey is to be believed from a few years ago, we are the third most frequently occurring entity after cats and dogs. So I think there is a business case to focus on them. But the challenges are pretty obvious. Humans make large displacements very quickly, and it becomes very challenging as soon as they become really quick to track these displacements. Then there's also a problem of loose clothing. It's already an intractable problem, but it becomes even more so when you don't know the stiffness of the material, the properties of the material, and then to even physically simulate such a thing is pretty challenging. And then the problem of self-occlusions are always there. You don't know what the person is doing behind with the hands, and you can only depend on some data priors to get this thing sorted. Now, in terms of the taxonomy of the challenges, we are now getting into a realm where the deformations are being driven by two sources. One is the piecewise rigid deformations that happen at the skeleton level. And then there are fine-grained non-rigid surface deformations, as we can see here. So we have a body model that is tightly fitting to the body, and then we have a clothing model that's free to move around in a certain fashion. So it gets interesting to model these things. Let's further go down to how people have approached this problem. Broadly, in the report, we have classified it into three categories. The first is template-free methods. They do not assume any assumptions about it being sort of a human. They're mostly data-driven. Then there are methods that use the parametric models that we've already talked about. Methods like SMPL and GOOM, which can give you some controls over the mesh of the character, and if you can have a initialization of that, you can deform the characters around that. And then you have template-based methods. Oh, I need to show this here. So then you have template-based methods where you assume that you have a very high fidelity template available with let's say 40K, 50K, 100K points. And then the task is to then articulate this or deform this in a similar way. But here you have a lot more information that you can use. So let's go over this one by one. So the first template-free methods, I don't exactly know when they started, but one of the more notable ones started coming around 2016, 17, 18. This one, for example, is called BodyNet, where the idea was that you have, if you somehow have the ground truth point cloud of the human, you can just learn a deep neural network based on a 3D CNN to learn it, as a volumetric heat map. This works pretty well, but it's a very large pipeline, and it requires a lot of data, and the results at that time were good, but not with current standards. And then came implicit methods. We might be aware of methods like PIFU that learn an implicit 0-1 surface to estimate where the surface boundary of the human surface would be. This is pixel aligned. So you, in addition to querying the XYZ position in the space, you also provide features corresponding to the image that's there as the input. So you can reconstruct the human. But the problem here was that these methods are a bit brittle when it comes to challenging poses, because obviously you need a large data set, and then you need to do everything here in a data-driven fashion. There are recently also works that do not as a data-driven method across a large data set, but also on let's say a single monocular video. So there the idea is that you take an off-the-shelf pose estimation method, so that then you have a base skeleton to deform about, and you learn the skinning weights as you train the network for this. And once you, as you're learning the skinning weights, along that you can also learn the deformations and then implicitly reconstruct the mesh. And now let's come to the template-based methods. So here the assumption is that we have a template, and the first question is how do you even get a template? So in a setting like this, we can record a character from multiple views with high resolution cameras, and then perform stereo reconstruction. to get a high quality textured template mesh. And on this, you can also extract other representations of the character if in case you need. For example, if you need coarse deformations, you can also extract an embedded graph. Of course, we also can have the skeleton of the character. And these things can be then used to drive or reconstruct methods from image evidences. So I'll talk about one such example here. This is deep cap. So the input to the method is a segmented input image. So you assume you have segmentations already. Now there's one branch that estimates the poses. This will be used to do the piecewise deformations. And then there is another branch that learns the surface deformations in a canonical space. So because it's a template mesh, you know everything. You can bring it down to the canonical pose quite easily because you know the skinning weights. And you learn the deformations living in this canonical space. There are reasons this makes that this is better than learning in the pose space because it becomes easier here. And once you have this, we can fuse the two of them together to get the full human performance capture. But the question is, how do you train it? An obvious solution would be that you have supervision on the skeleton. You also have supervision on the 3D surface that you can somehow reconstruct. But that apparently also is an active area of research to do dense reconstruction from multiple views. So an alternative is to just use multi-view image evidences. So you can have 2D detections from multiple views, and you can have a supervision loss on that. You can also have silhouettes from multiple views and try to argue about the shape of the character of the deformations of the mesh. And this already works sufficiently well. Another question is, we have done the reconstruction. How do we make it more plausible? And one way of doing that is to include physics. So you can include cloth dynamics, but if you are in a template-based setting, that template does not know about the existence of clothes. So you have to sort of get a layered template already, where you have a different template for the body, and then you have a different template for the what do you call it? For the clothes that are draped over the body. And then you try to physically simulate them. So in this method, for example, they used a simulator that could simulate the cloth deformations on the fly. So that was a contribution. And then you can have a rendering loss again to get physics-aware deformations. Now, there are a lot of works on this area. It's a very active area of research. And there are more exciting works to see in physics-based human simulation. Now let's go to parametric models. We have seen several parametric models in recent years. Some of them you would be knowing. And the good thing about them is that they are so easy to work with, and they provide you a very strong prior on the geometry of the character as well. So how do you make it deform? So this is one approach. So the idea is that in addition to the standard parametric model that just gives you naked body meshes, you also learn clothing-based deformations. So in this method, for example, they learned a separate set of upper body deformations and a separate set of lower body deformations and combine them. And so it was not learned through a neural network. It was basically optimized through iterative optimization. And as you can guess, it's a very difficult optimization. It will probably never be real time. It's difficult. So the next ideas were to make it learnable. So you have a data set, you collect the SMPL parameters, and then you also learn the deformation per vertex from the networks. And then using the rendering losses, you can argue about what the deformations might be over the base naked body models. And let's go back to PIFU that I talked about earlier, which was a template tree method. There was no prior about the human geometry, but you can of course add that. And because it's also an implicit method, you can argue that they are a bit more fine-grained, or they can have more higher frequency details. So among such works, we had here et al. It's called Arch++. So they had their first NSMPL estimate. And then from there, that gave them points to query in the 3D space, which were aligned with the human body's coarse mesh. Then we had Palmier here that did something similar, but for geometric features, they used 3D coordinate, which was encoding the geometry around the estimated SMPL mesh of the person. And then we also have methods like HNF that use implicit GOOM, which is also a parametric implicit model of a human body, and then they deform around the implicit GOOM's parameters. So the bottom line I'm conveying through this slide is that if you have some strong geometric prior, you can also do nice with deformations over the surfaces. And recently, there are also works that are integrating the scene as well as the objects or humans. An idea here, it's a very recent work, is to learn two separate deformation networks. So you have two different nerves, one for the human body and one for the scene, and you can encode them based on how far they are and jointly learn the deformations in this way. Now let's talk about some future directions. We have been talking a lot about parametric models, but wouldn't it be nice that we also have parametric models that are textured? So they also give us cues about appearance and not just geometry. And recently, there are some proposals that may facilitate such kind of parametric models. So we have Deep Fashion 3D data set that does appearance and geometry combined for human clothing. So probably someone can use it. Then this is a very crucial challenge, which is tracking the topological changes. I mean, all the methods I discussed earlier, they cannot handle if I take a jacket off of my my body. And that's a very interesting setting and a very important setting as well to address. And needless to say, we want not just coarse body, but as fine as we can. So sort of like a total capture, face, gaze, hair, everything. If we can integrate it into one single setup, that would be super cool. And finally, we must not forget that we need robust reconstructions, and ideally also reconstructions that are interpretable, like these methods, like Snug here. Like you can change you can exactly dictate what kind of properties for example, the clothing has, and you get reconstructions according to that. That would also be nice to have.